I occasionally find myself wanting to controllably spin things, and usually that leads me to the handy rotary table. Unfortunately, this little fella is made to withstand the forces of machining, which results in it being a bit chunky. And some of my spinny tasks, like measuring round things and applying a ring of glue, don't necessarily need the stiffness. Plus, I'm generally pretty lazy, so having a power feed would be awfully nice. So I decided to take a stab at a light-duty rotary table for axisymmetric activities down here in the basement. And now that I've got it built and gone a smidge overboard characterizing the runout of it, I thought it might be fun to take a look at how I went about doing both. I wanted to try and build it with only materials I already had on hand. Luckily, I'm a bit of a parts hoarder, so that still left me with some options. The rotary table is made primarily from 3D printed parts, with a few bearings, magnets, and heat sets tossed in for good measure. For the runout measurements, I've tinkered with everything from a dial indicator to building my own DIY displacement sensor to a much fancier hand-me-down chromatic confocal displacement sensor, but more on all that a bit later. The finished rotary weighs in at about 1.5 kilograms or 3.3 pounds, compared to the almost 13 kilograms or about 29 pounds for the one for the mill. In place of the T-slots on the machining rotary, I opted for a magnetic kinematic mount for quick, repeatable part placement, along with some M4 and M5 heat sets spread around for flexibility and interface options. It's designed to be driven by either a DC gear motor, a stepper, or just this hand wheel. For all three options, they couple into the drive mechanism with these clover couplings on either side. The coupler interface is based off a spider and hub style shaft coupling, but with a spider printed in. I've used this setup quite a few times now, and it's not perfect, but it gets the job done and it's pretty easy to integrate. For each motor type, there's a paired coupler with a close-fitting D-hub for the motor's output shaft to transfer the torque. The motors connect to the rotary base with these hubs that attach to the bolt pattern of the respective motor, and then to the array of heat sets here on the base. One side has a larger opening than the other, and this is to allow the hub on that side to extend in and provide some axial preload on the worm bearing race. This helps to hold the worm in position and reduce backlash. For the hand crank, it has the clover coupler on one side and a second square shank coupler on the other end. I also decided to add a roller skate bearing near the business end to stiffen up the hand feel a bit. The square shank sticks out through that bearing, and the handle just pops on. Looking underneath, we can see what those different drive options are actually driving. Those clover couplings on either end are integrated into the worm here, which is supported on either end by some roller bearings. The worm gear it meshes with is integrated into this hub here that is attached to the table above. This gearing gives me a 60-to-1 reduction, so each full rotation of the worm will give me 6 degrees of rotation of the table. There's a gap between the hub and the table, so the bolt tension here serves as the preload for the thrust bearing that the worm gear hub rides on, and for the main bearing up above. The main bearing's made up of this array of 3/8 inch or about 9.5 millimeter ball bearings sandwiched between V-grooves that run around both the table and the base. While this bearing arrangement works to provide a low-cost but stiff option, this is an area of the design I definitely want to take another look at if/when I do a design revision. The main bearing and the thrust bearing both define their own plane that they expect their mated parts to ride on. Since these planes aren't likely to end up really being parallel due to build tolerances, I suspect this overconstraint is a meaningful part of the runout I'm seeing. But before we dive into those runout measurements, I want to define what I'm referring to when I say radial, axial, or angular runout. The radial runout is movement perpendicular to the rotation axis. By the way, do you like my fancy animation skills? The angular runout, or tip tilt of the stage, is any rotation, like the exaggerated one shown, and the axial runout is the air motion parallel to the axis of rotation, or in this case, up and down. Okay, now that I've defined my types of runout, how can I put some numbers to them? For axial runout, I can put an artifact on the table and measure how much it moves up and down as it rotates. So by placing some sort of displacement sensor overhead and tracking this surface as it spins, I can get my axial movement. Easy enough. But it's a little bit trickier for the other two, and that's because they're coupled. Looking again at my incredibly realistic simulation here, at any given height off of the table, if we look at just a slice of the thing we're measuring, the slice appears to just be moving radially. So if we set up our displacement sensor to measure the radial runout, how do we separate the radial runout from the angular runout? One way to do that, and the way that I went with, is to choose some height above the table and call that my work height, or z equals 0, and all radial movement at this height is taken as pure radial runout. So I can put my displacement sensor at this height, measure my runout, then I move my sensor further up along the axis to some height, say z equals 20 millimeters, and measure again. By using the known distance between the measurement heights, the difference in the radial measurements, and a little trig, I can get the angular movement. Alright, so with these 3 sensor setups, I can get my 3 different runout values. But what to use for actually measuring these displacements? For my first few tests, I just used a dial indicator and wrote down indicator readings at regular intervals of table rotation. This approach worked fine, but it's a bit tedious. It was at this point that I fell into my normal trap of attempting to be lazy, actually leading to distractions and way more effort. I decided to make myself a displacement sensor. I made a full video about this sensor a little while back. Yeah, I've been dragging out this rotary table thing that long. If you missed that video, and you're interested in more on how this guy works, I'll link to that video down in the description. But the gist is that the movement of the target pushes this flexure along with it. The movement of that flexure is detected by this opto interrupter here, and that gives me an electrical signal that's proportional to the movement. When I built and calibrated this thing originally, I used this perf board circuit to drive the opto, but I decided to clean that up by designing a custom PCB and sending it off to PCBWay. I got a stack of 10 of them for only $5, so I can use them on my somewhat absurd number of opto-including builds. Not only do they give me more rigid connection points, but they also have mount points for easily tossing them into an enclosure, like this one I made for the rotary table testing. But while I have been pretty happy with my DIY displacement sensor, more recently I lucked my way into this fella. It's a chromatic confocal displacement sensor, and it can give me non-contact displacement measurements reliably to within a few microns. So naturally I then had to bring it into the mix. I secured the rotary to this optical breadboard, and then built a bridge with 2020 extrusions to attach the sensors. I can get the sensor into whichever measurement orientation I want by just moving the bridge around as needed. Finally, let's look at some data. Here's a collection of 7 repeatability runs taken at z equals 70 millimeters. The x-axis is the position of the rotary table in degrees, and the y-axis is the deviation from average. And there appears to be a nice, big, sine wave-esque curve giving me over plus minus a millimeter of error. But there's a problem. I want the runout of just my rotary table, but this data also includes the errors in the part. So I need to separate the runout of my test part from the runout of my table. Well, it starts with that kinematic mount I built into my tabletop. Because that mount's repeatable and at a known angular spacing, I can retake measurements at the 3 different clocking positions and get myself some data that looks like this. Looks like that large sine wave from before is now split into 3 distinct sine waves. And how about that? They're spaced at the same 120 degrees as my kinematic mount. That allows me to isolate the portion of the runout that's coming from the test part itself and subtract it to isolate info about the stage only. Pretty cool, right? Not only does this allow me to isolate the motion of the table, the same approach would allow me to measure the geometry of a test part itself with the table's errors removed, which is one of the planned uses for this table, measuring the roundness of parts. But for now, we'll just focus on the table side of things. After removing the errors from the part, the total runout went from more than plus minus a millimeter to better than plus minus 0.3 millimeters. But there still is a clearly visible, repeatable pattern in this error data. Sometimes, I think it's easier to see what's happening in these types of runout measurements by looking at them in polar coordinates, and this is often how you'll see runout presented on datasheets for rotary stages and such. A well-behaved stage will have a plot that looks something like this, with all the data making a nice, well-defined circular ring. Looking at this plot in polar coordinates clearly shows that there's some eccentricity, but it looks to be a repeatable eccentricity, and if it's repeatable, it should be possible to compensate for it. Subtracting out this eccentricity finally gets me to what I really want to know. What are the random or pseudo-random errors that I'm just going to have to live with? Here's how that looks for these measurements we've been looking at, with a resulting runout in the ballpark of plus minus 0.1 millimeters, or about 100 microns, or about 4 thou if you prefer freedom units. But to put these part and synchronous error compensations more to the test, how about we apply these corrections to that repeatability data I showed earlier? It cut my error from more than plus minus a millimeter to a bit better than plus minus 0.2 millimeters, or 200 microns, or about 8 thou. This before and after really helps show how much heavy lifting these corrections are doing. In addition to those 200 microns of radial runout, I use the same basic approach to measure an axial runout of about the same plus minus 200 microns, and an angular runout of a little better than 0.1 degrees. So basically, all that to conclude, not as good as I'd like. I'm thinking a rotary table V2 may indeed have to be in my future. Ideally, I'd love to see if I could get a mostly printed design that would keep the runout closer to around 25 micron, or about 1 thou, for each of the linear errors, and closer to 0.01 degrees on the angulars. One thing that I suspect could help me get there, as I mentioned earlier, would be to rework the constraint scheme around the main bearing. I haven't decided yet what exactly that would look like, but I think removing the overconstraint on the table caused by the conflict between the main bearing and the thrust bearing would have a meaningful impact on the runout performance. As a part of that rework, I also want to design in some decoupling between the worm gear and the table to reduce table movement caused by runout errors in the worm gear itself. The other significant change that I want to make is to integrate a rotary encoder. That would allow me to keep track of table position without having to rely on stepper counts. But anywho, those are topics for another day. I think that's probably enough on my rotary table shenanigans for now. If you have any questions or suggestions, I'd love to hear them below. I'll include a link down below to the details on the build process and more detailed data from the testing and such. Thanks for watching, and thanks to PCBWay for their support. If you'd like to see how they can help you with something you're working on, check out the link down below. Happy building!